It's go time. Yeah. Are we on? Is it started? Hi, my name is Michael-Birch Pierce, and I am an embroidery and embellishment artist. I went to SCAD 10 years ago to study for my M.F.A. in fibers, and I focused on beading, embroidery, textile, and fashion design. And I'm here to show you guys how to do some really basic embroidery stitches. Nothing crazy, they're pretty beginner things. I'm gonna start with some thread, I'm gonna move on to some sequins. I've got a collection launching tomorrow with Levi's, and it's gonna be this app exclusive collection where if you download the Levi's app, I think tomorrow morning around 10 a.m.-ish, they're gonna launch, and there's 10 exclusive limited edition jackets that I completely hand embroidered, that you can see on SCAD's page, you can see on my Instagram page at Michael-Birch, and yeah, those are gonna be available tomorrow, so I'm really excited. So I've got here this vintage Levi's jacket that I stole from my best friend's vintage shop. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna embellish our own. And so I've got some cool patterns, some cool weird logos that I'm gonna stitch on here. I work a lot with rhinestones and leaves and all sorts of sparkly things. I do a lot of bodies and stuff too, but I figured I'd keep it pretty simple here today. So yeah, we're gonna get started, I guess. Let me see. We have, first of all, you need a jacket or you need some sort of fabric. You can also do it on a separate piece of fabric like this, and then we can cut it out and we can stitch it onto the jacket later, right? And we need embroidery floss. You're gonna want 6-strand, it's like strandable embroidery floss. DMC makes a really great one that I love.
It's like half cooked. And I'm gonna show you how it finishes. So I'm gonna just outline this shape around here. I'd probably pin this on to make sure it's on there really safe and secure and not moving around. We get the idea. You guys can see that there is a banana leaf here that I'm trying to stitch on here. Cool. So what we're gonna do first is we're gonna work with this embroidery floss. And so I'm pulling this out. The best amount of embroidery floss for you to start with is always going to be if you stretch out from your fingertip to the opposite shoulder. If you're, you know, around like halfway through 5 feet through just over 6 feet, it's probably going to be about 1 yard is that distance. And the reason why we use that amount is because if it's more than that, you're reaching out and you're pulling your thread through, and you got to reach back and keep pulling like you're a magician pulling like scarves out of a sleeve or a hat or whatever they do. This way, it's only as far as your arm span, so there's not too much. And then it's like the most you could possibly have on at one time. What I'm also going to do is to split this. You guys can see this on the screen. Oh wait, once we had to restart. All good, back on now. Are we good? I hope you guys got all of this information because we restarted. Hopefully you got what I said in there. You can see in this thread, I'm going to try to hold it up to this camera up here. You can probably see it on both of them, right? Do I need to do the thing like it's a makeup video or something, like put it up against your hand? I don't know, you can't see that. So there's 6 strands in an embroidery floss, okay? And so you don't need all of them in order to embroider. You only need a few. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna pinch it here. I wanna work with 3. So I'm gonna pinch about 1 inch from the top, and I'm just gonna grab 1 singular thread, and I'm gonna pull it straight out while I'm still pinching. And it's gonna slide right out. A lot of people like to split the thread and twist it and undo it. All of that's gonna get you tangled up and it's gonna be a mess. So you wanna grab 1 thread at a time while you pinch about 1 inch from the top and just pull straight out. All right, I'm gonna keep doing that. All right, so I got 3 of these. I'm gonna set my 3 that are left together aside, and then take these 3 loose ones and sort of strand these back together, like lay them up, start working with them. Cool? So now they're all about the same length. They're good to go. I'm gonna grab an embroidery needle. Embroidery needles are different than regular needles because they have like a really long eye to them. I don't know how I can possibly show that to you. Can you see that? There. Yeah, there we go. Maybe. How many strands do I work with? I work with 3 for this. You can work with whatever you want. The more strands you have, the thicker it's going to be. Sometimes it'll fill in things quicker. It just depends on the look that you're going for. I like to do 3 because this allows me to just have the exact same amount still sitting here. So when I run out, I'm like ready to go with more, right? So yeah, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to thread it through my needle. It's good to have like a little tail hanging off of here. You want your tail to be maybe about 6 inches because that 6 inches is going to be just long enough for you to hold the needle here and just have a little bit hanging out right there. Does that make sense? So that way you can hold on to it so you don't lose it. And then on the opposite side, we need to tie a little knot. So we'll just kind of like loop-de-loop, tie a little knot. I've got fancier knots that I like to do, but this will do it. And my fancy knots are hard to explain on Instagram. So we don't need to do all that. So I got a knot at the end. I got my needle down here. We're not knotting it anywhere close to the needle. A lot of first-time sewers think you're supposed to tie it to the needle, but that's crazy because you can't fit the knot through the fabric, right? So what I'm going to do, oh, also, God, there's so many steps here. This is an embroidery hoop. Mine might be different from yours. You might have one like this that's got like a little screw on it. I'm going to show it to both cameras. Basically what you do, you put the solid hoop underneath of there. There we go. Put the solid hoop there, and then you take the one with the screw on it and you shove it down over top of it. And you can tighten that up. And that's going to get it nice and taut. What you want is this fabric to be taut like the head of a drum for you to stitch. So I'm going to kind of like tug at the fabric on all the sides and try to get this really tight. I'm going to keep closing this up. This should be really tight. Like you shouldn't be able to twist the screw any further. Because if you can twist it any further, that means your fabric's not tight enough. You should be able to like hit that and it's like the head of a drum. Cool. So we're going to get started. I know some people are asking me questions. I'm going to answer your questions as soon as I get started on this and do the boring stuff, okay? So I'm going to come up from behind the fabric and I'm going to start. What we're doing now is a back stitch. This stitch is going to outline what we're doing here. So I'm going to come up from behind the fabric, just past where I want to start, and I'm coming back to where that stitch or where that line sort of ended, right? And so with each stitch, each of my stitches, these are probably maybe like 3/16, between 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch. When you do this a lot, you can start to like really eyeball exactly how much a 1/16 of an inch is. It's kind of crazy, right? But what I'm going to do is with each stitch, I'm going to come up behind the fabric and I'm going to go a full stitch length past where my last one ended. And so what I'm doing, I'm coming up right here. Do you see that space right here? God, maybe you can't see that. Maybe it's not close enough. But the space here is going to be, maybe it's kind of blown out. I'm not sure what's happening here. I'm going to stitch a stitch length past the end of the last stitch, and then we're going to come back. That's why it's called a back stitch. And we're going to back stitch right into the hole where the last stitch ended. You see that? So I'm going first. I can kind of do it forward for you guys here too, maybe, if that's better. We're going to go forward 1 whole stitch length. You can see that needle come out 1 whole stitch length. And then you come back to where the last stitch ended. And we can stitch through there. Well, let me know if you have any questions about this. If this isn't making any sense for you, I'm happy to explain it a little further. We're gonna work on this for just a couple minutes before we move on to play with another stitch. Cool. Somebody asked me on here, I think, who is my most influential professor that I had at SCAD? I don't like so many of them. I mean, like I loved all of, I don't think I disliked a single professor that I had. I would say probably the most influential would be Pamela Wiley in the fibers department. Just an incredible woman, an amazing educator, someone who's so passionate about passing on her knowledge to her students, passionate about inspiring her students, passionate about like seeing them excel and do great, just always super supportive. She's no longer teaching at SCAD. I think she retired. So maybe I should tell you guys some professors that I really loved that are still there. I mean, all the fibers professors. Kiowa Easley is incredible. Jessica Smith was really hard on me. Jessica Smith like kicked my butt and gave me hard critiques and taught me lessons that I wasn't always ready to learn. She's pretty great. She's pretty great. Also, there's Sam Norgard, who teaches in foundations and fibers, I believe. And that's another professor who's just so excited to teach, so excited to lay out the information that she has and see their students excel at sort of applying that information and those techniques to their work. I'm rambling about all of my favorite people right now. I'm sorry if there's a professor that I didn't mention. I love you all. Carmela Spinelli is really incredible. There's no more questions. Do you guys have any more questions? At this point, do you guys see what I'm doing? I'm following this line. What I want to make sure that I'm doing is stay on that line that I've drawn. I want to make sure that I'm splitting that line right down the middle, that I'm coming back. A good embroidery stitch is going to, it's going to be like flat and smooth. It's not going to have weird tension, like pulling on it oddly. And you also don't, you want to make sure that each stitch is uniform, that each stitch is the exact same size as the stitch before it. So as you're starting off, no, they're not going to be perfect. But as you keep going, you're going to be much better at being able to like really gauge what size each stitch is as you're making it. You can just start to eyeball that 1/4 of an inch in here. No more questions. Okay, I'm going to keep going for just another minute on this back stitch. I really like to use the back stitch to like outline the shapes that I'm working with. I like to, it's the most basic stitch ever. Like in fashion design, it's a constructive stitch. So it's going to help join two pieces of fabric together. In surface design, in embroidery, it's just going to be your really standard outline. I like it. It just connects everything together. It's just so simple. It's so pretty. My favorite technique learned. Ooh, what is my favorite technique? Okay, my favorite embroidery technique. I wasn't even going to show you guys my favorite technique today because it's a little complicated. I wonder if there's time to show you. My favorite technique is a stitch called the French knot. And it's just, I love France. So of course I love the French knot. I really loved studying at SCAD Lacoste. I go back there every year, basically. because Provence is just perfect. So I don't know, maybe there's this affinity with French things that makes me love the French knot. Maybe it's my Frenchness. But it's really cool. The French knot is this little stitch here on this sample. It's just like this cute little knot that like sits on the surface of the fabric, and it's just adorable. I use it like for freckles on faces, sometimes like little like nipples on like a chest of a person that I'm stitching. Sometimes you can clump a bunch of them together and make a little sheep or a or a cloud, something fluffy. I'll show you guys a French knot really quick. Should I take a fibers-free elective? Of course you should take a fibers-free elective. Fibers is so cool. I wonder who teaches the fibers elective, like the intro to fibers class. It could be Jennifer or Liz or Sally. I don't know. It's been like 10 years since I've been there, so I'm not sure who teaches it. But it's so cool because fibers is so open-ended. Fibers can cover, it can cover stitching, it can cover dyeing, it can cover paper making, it can cover printing, weaving, probably a dozen other things that I'm forgetting, beading. Fibers is so open, like anything is a fiber. Just a bunch of little things that come together to make a big thing is fibers. Those little things are fibers. And so there's just infinite possibilities with the techniques you can do in the fibers department. And like all the professors there are incredible, like blow my mind. So what I'm gonna do, so I'm gonna show you this French knot really quick. I'm sorry, somebody asked a question, so I'm like being annoying and losing my train of thought. So with the French knot, you can also always look these up on YouTube. There's always some sweet little old lady who'll show you how to do any embroidery knot. But you kind of take the thread up, you cast it overhand over your needle. Can you guys see this in the video? You cast it overhand over the needle, you wrap it around that needle like 2 times, 3 times. The more times you wrap it, the bigger your knot's gonna be, right? You take your needle, you plunge it right back down in that same hole where you came out. Go down in there. And while you hold this here, do you see that knot is still there on the surface of the fabric? I pull that thread through and it creates the cutest little knot right on the surface of my fabric. Cool? I think it's cool. I don't know how much you can see that. Sorry if my lights aren't great. Wow, it's 7:19. We've already gone through 20 minutes of a tutorial and I've got like 3 stitches left to do. So what we'll do next is, I'm gonna show you a satin stitch next. I think I'm gonna fill in this little section right here with a satin stitch. A satin stitch is really fun because it's a fill stitch. So fill stitches kind of, I'm gonna show you on this right here. You can kind of see it there and on here. Oh wow, you can see it on both screens at once. Fill stitches are gonna fill in large areas. Shocking, right? Satin stitch is called satin stitch because it incorporates large floats. And a float is a thread that sort of like sets on top of the fabric. And it's a long section, it's a big long stitch. And the more of them that you build up next to each other, the more of a continuous unbroken surface that you have. And so it's gonna reflect light back. So you think about satin fabric, you think that satin fabric is shiny fabric, right? So it's reflecting a lot more light back at you. So that's what a satin stitch is gonna do. It's creating the same sort of thing in a satin fabric where the fabric is, or the fibers are kind of laying there and creating a large area to reflect light. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna fill in this section right here of this leaf. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna come up here right on the edge of the fabric. Can I bring this down? I'm gonna have a light in my thing. If I bring, I'm gonna hold it up closer to you. Cool, okay, now you can kind of see it on both screens. I'm coming up right on the edge of what I've already outlined, and I'm gonna stitch right over it. You always wanna stitch past the line, not on the line, because then you can cover up whatever's underneath it there, right? So I'm starting on one side, I'm coming over to the other side and just stitching right down with one big float that's going to come over there. Then I'm going to scoot over like literally a millimeter, like right next to where the last one was. And I'm going to come back over here. It's important that you always start on the same side when you do each stitch, that each stitch you see is coming from this side. I don't know if it's your left side or right side. Maybe that's left to right, I guess, if you're looking at it. Right, so you're starting on that side and ending on this side. It's always important to do that. How often do I use a machine compared to hand embroider? What are deciding factors? I really like to use the machine. I love to use my hand. There's something really meditative. There's something really calming and beautiful about doing each stitch by hand and kind of like just the action of the needle plunging through the fabric, pulling it through, putting it back, just concentrating on where this thread goes. It's so intentional. It's so slow. I think there's something like my life can sometimes feel so busy and so chaotic that there's something so intentional and so metered and well thought out and beautiful about just sitting and stitching by hand. So I would always pick hand stitching over machine stitching, but also machine stitching is faster. So if I've got a lot to do, I'm going to do machine stitches. I don't do like computer programmed machine stitches. I hate those. I really love to mess around with the machine and kind of like paint with the machine and draw with the machine and get kind of freehand with it. So in my Levi's collaboration that launches tomorrow, this is the embroidery that's going to be in it. I don't know if you guys can see that on both cameras. And so this is painted basically with 11 different colors of thread, just stacking them on top of each other and creating this figure. Oh, the light's terrible. But yeah, so the machine stitching is really fun to do stuff like this. There's a thread right here I want to snip. Somebody just asked me about the other things I do by machine. So there's something that I do by machine that I'm kind of famous for, notorious for. I don't know if I'm famous, but I'm known for stitching portraits with my sewing machine. And so what I'll do, I'll just show you one of these guys. Ooh, just threw a pin across the room. This is a portrait that I draw. I draw these in one continuous line with my sewing machine. So it's while somebody sits in front of me, I sit at the sewing machine, and in 3 minutes, I move the fabric under the sewing machine and I draw a picture of you in 3 minutes. It's exciting. It's fun. I developed it while I was at SCAD. It was in my second quarter at SCAD. I had no intention of making embroidery my career. I thought I was going to be a print designer. I thought I was going back into the fashion industry full time. And this ended up being my whole career. So now I fly all over the world and do these crazy parties. I've done these at the Oscars. I've done these at the Super Bowl, South by Southwest, Fashion Week, Art Basel. I'm supposed to be in France next week doing portraits at this crazy fashion festival. We're not allowed in France right now from America, so that's probably not happening unless something happens. But yeah, so these are really cool. So this is what I do on the machine. And so if I'm embroidering on machine, it's going to be one of these crazy things. So do you guys see what I'm doing? How I'm creating this satin stitch here? That's going to fill space up a lot quicker and a lot easier than trying to stitch like single little stitches the whole time. So I'm almost out of thread. So I'm going to flip this over. Can you guys see the back of embroidery is sometimes way more beautiful than the front. Like over here with my sequins, we're going to get that to a minute, but look at that sequin pattern right there. Show it to that camera too. Sequin pattern's really cool. So anyways, the way that I tie off any stitch. So if I'm doing a basic embroidery stitch, if I'm doing a crazy complicated one, if I'm doing beads, rhinestones, anything, all you need to do is 3 simple tight, tiny stitches in exactly the same spot. And that's going to be enough to tie off your threads. You don't need to tie crazy knots. You don't need to leave a bunch of thread hanging because it's going to all come out. Like it'll be fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of push up on the fabric. Can you kind of like see my finger kind of pushing right here? I'm going to push up a little bit. I'm going to catch a thread or 2 of the actual textile of the denim jacket. And I'm just going to stitch through, like grabbing like just a couple threads. I'm just going to do 3 little stitches in exactly the same spot. I'll do a couple more just so you guys see, but like eventually by the 3rd stitch, you're basically just going through the stitches you've already done. It's not even going to go in. It's so tight. It's, so yeah, so that's a tight, tight little knot right here. I come all the way down to the edge and I clip it off. The more threads you have hanging around on the back of your embroidery, the more chances you have to accidentally grab those threads and like pull them through the fabric and like make a big tangled knotty mess. So I like to avoid that at all costs. So I trim right up to my knots so that you don't have to see any of that. Cool. Does this make sense? Everybody's good? Everybody understands where we're going? There's probably time for me to do this sequin stitch. I don't think we're gonna get to beads, but you know, that's fine. Beads are crazy. Beads take a lot of work. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna switch to sequins. And you can see this section of my banana leaf. I've already started to sequin in there. And so all of these are kind of layered on top of each other like fish scales or something. There's something just really soothing about that. I'm going to stitch all of these on one by one. So I'm going to stitch I'll stitch an extra little section right here. Should I add on to that one? I'm going to stitch it. No. It's really hard to make these decisions. So I'm going to figure it out. We can have 10 more minutes is what they just told me. Sorry, I've got a screen over here that has all of the things on. So if I'm looking over there, I'm not crazy. I'm going to pull one singular thread out of what's remaining. To do sequins, you don't need a whole bunch of embroidery thread. I'm just going to take a single one and I'm going to double it up. Okay. So I'm going to go through the eye of my needle right here. I'm going to take both loose ends of the thread and they're going to, kind of line up there. And so basically it's folded over. So I'm stitching with 2 threads, but there's only 1 thread going through the eye of the needle, if that makes sense. I'm going to go and I'm going to tie a little knot at the end of that. You can tie it however you want to. If you don't get it. Someone says sequins make such great holographic looks. Sequins make everything the best. I love sequins. I researched a lot of sequins and I teach a lot of sequins. Oh, I've got a whole mess on my table here. I'm trying to find all my sequins. I researched a lot of sequins. When I was on NPR earlier this year as a sequin expert, answering questions about the history of sequins. And they kind of started as coins that were stitched onto fabric. There's a lot of different meanings with sequins. Some cultures see them as, they see shining surfaces as gateways to other worlds and spirit realms. Shiny objects you see on my shirt, that each sequin reflects the light as a separate surface. And so they dazzle the eye, they kind of reflect light back at you. And a lot of cultures think that the evil eye is the most powerful, like dangerous glance that a person can give you. And there's a lot of evil energy that can get in if they look at you with the evil eye. So if you're wearing something sparkly and sequined, their first glance of the evil eye doesn't go to your eyes, it goes to your clothes instead because it's distracted them. And it also then reflects that evil eye right back at the person giving it to you. So like sequins is pretty, and holographic and sparkly as they are, hold a really powerful place in a lot of cultures as a sense of protection. So I think sequins are so much more beautiful than just weird little pieces of mylar to stitch on your clothes. What I'm going to do, I'm going to come up here. I'm going to come behind this sequin, and I'm going to stitch it down with a single little stitch in one direction, right above it. I'm going to scoot next to that sequin. And when I'm scooting across, I'm trying to scoot the radius width of the sequin right past it, if that makes any sense. Can you guys see that? God, I think the lights are kind of terrible here. So I'm stitching right past it. So just so that the sequin sets exactly next to the one before it, so that that sequin touches the one next to it. And I'm going to stitch right above it, right on the edge of the sequin. So I'm only stitching on one side, so these sequins could kind of like flip up if you want to flip up. Stitch a short little row of these sequins here. I really want to wear this jacket whenever it's done. But I grabbed one in my size because I was like, oh no, I'll make this, we'll sell it, it'll be great. No, I want all these sequin leaves and rhinestones all over this. Any other questions? We're gonna run out of time pretty soon. So anyways, I can make this row of sequins as long as I want. Oh man, I got a weird little knot. Just gotta watch your tension. You gotta watch this thread. Make sure it's not out of control, okay? Some sequins are flat, some sequins are cupped, and so these sequins are cupped. So I always want them to like cup up. I want them to be concave so that they're facing up and reflecting more light back. Okay, here's where it gets tricky. When I'm doing my next one, oh God, she said 5 more minutes. I don't know, 5 more minutes. So right here, can you guys see, where's the camera? That is so, it's like blown out. I'm gonna do it to this camera. Maybe, no. So what I'm gonna do is I'm splitting the difference right between these sequins right here. The needle needs to come up right in line with the top edge of the stitch that goes through this whole row of sequins. So it's right between them, but perfectly in line with the top hole of each of those. So I'm gonna come up through here, pick up another sequin, come up through the back of it, and that's gonna lay here in a way that it's gonna cover those previous 2 stitches for the most part, and fill in this sort of hole in between them. And so we're staggering them like bricks or fish scales. I can pick up the sequin and I can set it on that needle before I pull the needle all the way through. Come all the way through. This is fun. I don't know what else to tell you guys. SCAD's really cool. If you're a student at SCAD, make the most of it. I know that COVID really sucks. And probably learning online isn't the greatest, but I've learned, like, I teach fashion too, and like there's a lot of cool ways to interact with students. I can interact with them a lot more at home. I get to interact via like Google Drive and Blackboard and Zoom all at the same time. Sometimes I feel like it's like, you know, kind of bringing us closer together, but I really miss like being in front of people, right? Like really working on things one-on-one. But just continue to hone your skills, make the most of it. This can't last forever. Does this make sense, how all these sequins are going on here? Each one is gonna stagger with a line before it, and if I'm stitching right in between where the last one started, if I'm stitching right in line with it, so that that hole that I'm coming up right in between the edge of those 2 stitches, it's gonna lay perfect and beautiful, and it's gonna create just a fantastic fish scaling quality to it. Cool. I've got 2 minutes left. This is so sad. I want it to last, like, can we do this for an hour next time, please? Please. God, hopefully I haven't been annoying. Hopefully this has been interesting. I'm gonna stitch this. I'll share this on my Instagram probably when it's all done. So if you guys follow my IG stories or follow me on Instagram, you can probably see all of this come to life. It'll probably be a couple weeks as I finish multiple other projects in the pipes. I've got a lot of commissions and exhibitions coming up. So I'm gonna put one more sequin on, and I'm gonna remind you guys how we tie all this off, okay? So I'm gonna put one more sequin on here, stitch down, sign off. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna just, again, I'm stitching right behind a stitch that I already did before, just grabbing a thread or two and just kind of doing 3 tight, tiny little stitches in exactly the same spot. I'm gonna do a 4th one just to drive it home, just so you guys know exactly what I'm doing. There you go, I stitched it. It's beautiful, it's perfect, it's amazing. Looks like Linda Evangelista, the model. Just dropped my scissors on the ground. Let me see what this looks like. Right, so we're getting there. It's gonna take you a long time to do an embroidered jacket. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it, but you can rewatch this IG live video as much as you want. I've got some rhinestones that are going to go on here. I think this one would be cut out and applique onto there. So we've got like a red rhinestone. Maybe that'll go up on the shoulder. Cool. I just want to thank you for watching this IG live workshop. Feel free to DM me at Michael-Birch on Instagram with any questions about SCAD, about embroidery, about anything I can help you with.